down there in your lab, you have an accelerated UV testing machine.
Yes,
Can you
correct.
explain how that works?
So with the accelerated UV machine, what it does is basically you have for us, we have our stain on the substrate.
Like brick or concrete?
Yeah, so we have what we call QUV panels.
Okay.
And we'll put the QUV panels with our whatever we're testing. So if we're testing new types of pigment, we'll put it into our base, put it on there, and then we'll obviously compare. We'll also put, our current products in there and products that we use to make sure if it's performing better than the new pigments that we're testing out. So we'll put it on there, we'll close it up, and we'll set it on cycles. So you can vary, it depends on the testing. It's just, important to follow the standard and make sure you're finding the one that works for you. For us, we obviously, since it's UV, we're gonna use UV fluorescent lamps. And
so that's kind of mimicking natural sunlight, but it's like a concentrated version, so you're able to see how it stands up to make 20 years of exposure to sunlight, right?
Correct. So there's no direct correlation for that testing, but what this is it's supposed to give us an idea of in these intense conditions how these pigments are going to react. And what you do is when you do a QUV, you also want to as well do an outdoor weathering testing, which we're also setting up as well to continue with the ones that perform optimally in the QUV. We're going to put those outside as well for the natural weathering testing.
Okay.
And of course, there's a standard for that as well. And when you do is you compare it to kind of give yourself that timeline of, okay, how long and how much weathering can these samples take? And we test the UV light fastness, like I mentioned, how they hold up to long-term exposure to the UV. And because there's a condensation cycle, it also tests any kind of chalking, how they hold up. If any kind of chalking is going to happen after constant exposure to condensation, because rain's going to happen, especially when you're outdoors. So it's a factor to consider as well.
Have you all UV tested paint versus stain and seen how that performs, or do you all only test stain?
So we mainly only test stain because we're looking for our products themselves. There are QUV studies usually already done on paints. Usually the manufacturers do them themselves. It's a little harder to compare because with a lot of what I've found, especially when I'm looking for pigment data, they'll do it in like an acrylic base, and which is fine. But sometimes they'll do like a PVC coating on top of it, so almost like the pigment's protected, and that it's
so the
pretty
paint
durable. PVC
so the paint itself is acrylic based, but then you're saying they put a protective coat over it and then test it, which is not
exactly what I want, because I want to see how the pigments themselves hold up, not if they're protected by another film, because that binder might be great, might give them a little bit of a longer, life just because it's absorbing a lot of the UV exposure from them. But it's also harder to ascertain what the damage is to the pigment, I feel like, because that coating is going to take most of the damage. So any damage you see could be absorbed by the coating, but a lot of the coatings they use are those very intense film formings like we talked about, very durable, similar to like epoxy that you would put on your floor. So they're highly durable, they're not coming off, they're almost plastic.
Yeah.
And which is great, but as we see with plastic, it doesn't really, not a lot damages it. So you can't really.
It's not a fair comparison.
It's not a fair comparison, no. So when you have like our stains, because they penetrate, the pigment's more exposed. It's incorporated into the binder matrix. Mm-hmm. But it still has more exposure to UV than it would in an acrylic binder where it's protected.